Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. Tomorrow and day after, that's the 9th of December and 10th of December, are the days which President Joe Biden has decided to meet about 100 leaders, and he is calling it the Summit for Democracy. The leaders who have been invited to participate belong to different countries, which are democratic and not so democratic. Civil society leaders, private sector, and various others. And these leaders would discuss the issues relating to democracy, democratic order, as well as find out what inhibits the democratic growth. PM Modi's expected participation is there, but then I personally feel that this is a mistake Modi is making and the government of India is making. India shall be a target at the Summit for Democracy, the so-called Summit for Democracy. Look at the background: relativism, misinformation about India. I mean, just recently that stand-up comedians' comments had called for a lot of reaction. Confusion is there, polarization is there, and recently the National Security Advisor had talked of the new front of war with the civil society. Now, all these are the ammunition which the opponents of India are going to use. These 100 leaders are 100 countries, and the leaders from civil society, private sector, want to set forth an affirmative agenda for democratic renewal and to tackle the greatest threat faced by the democracies today. I'm amazed and I fail to understand why the government of India did not look at it. Look at the list of invitees. We have a Taliban ruled Afghanistan. By what stretch of imagination you call that democracy? Democracies of Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, fine. And according to USA, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka have the same issue as India has, same challenges. They call it democracy deficit. But Pakistan has been invited. Now imagine it. Bhutan has not been invited, Bangladesh has not been invited, Sri Lanka has not been invited. And all three are great democracies. Bhutan is a constitutional democracy. But Bangladesh and Sri Lanka have the problem because of the internal issues. But of all the people, Afghanistan gets an invitation and Pakistan gets an invitation. And Pakistan is where army called the shots. More than this is a contradiction of the invitees, and it gives a respectable platform to the critics of India. Pakistan is not going to miss an opportunity. And this summit comes at a piquant moment. Just a few hours back, the Chief of the Defence Service of India died. Whether it was a sabotage or not, nobody knows. That will be seen. But earlier in 1963, India had suffered the death of 6 generals. And that was supposed to be a sabotage. So, the world's largest, most popular democracy, which by US is called to be democracy, but the spokesmen of US have other views. There's a Freedom House, and it's a US based company, and recently they published Freedom of the World Index. And they very categorically stated India is not free, it's partly free. Now that is stupid, idiotic. Either you are free or you are not free. What is this partly free? It's just like saying he is partly a prisoner. What does it mean? Then the Swedish Institute, VDEM, calls India an electoral autocracy. Tell me which country is not autocracy after being elected. The president of USA has such powers that he can ride roughshod and start a world war. The best democracy is supposed to be British, the mother of democracies. And is there the Prime Minister not the final authority? So to talk of India as an electoral autocracy, and then this VDEM says that India is as good a dictator, as bad a dictator as Hungary is, as Turkey is, as Philippines is, where the authoritarian rulers rule the roost. Now this always has provided ammunition to condemn India, to criticize India, and Indian policy makers have made this most undesirable decision to participate. You see, our problem is that we do not foresee what's going to happen. India should have refused the invitation, refused to be associated with countries like Turkey, refused to be associated with people like those ruling Afghanistan or Pakistan, not socially, but said that they are not democratic, and if it's a democratic summit, then countries like Bhutan, which is a world famous for its human happiness index, should be invited. Now, they are going to condemn India because of the human rights, so-called human rights violation in Kashmir. Because there the record of the world's longest internet ban has been there. Really, it's the second largest, because the largest was in Myanmar. Then they are going to condemn India for use of anti-terrorism laws to silence critics. They are going to condemn the government that is not ensuring freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution. They are going to condemn the government and India for CAA and NRC because they say it's anti-Muslim. They would not dare criticize China for its syncretization of religion. And they say that India is like China, but not condemn China, condemn India. And they say there is invasive high-tech surveillance. In fact, they are going to shred India's democratic image. Only last week, UN Human Rights Office had condemned India for the arrest of a human rights activist, Khurram Parvez, in Kashmir. And he had also condemned India for increasing use of UAPA to stifle the work of the human rights defenders, journalists and the critics in Jammu and Kashmir. So given this, the agenda of the summit holds contemporary resonance in India. Let's not deny it. And according to the State Department of USA, the summit will convene around three broad themes: defending democracy against authoritarianism, and they say India is authoritarian; addressing and fighting corruption, which is all over the world, including USA. Otherwise, do you think that President Obama, whose annual salary was $400,000 odd, could buy an estate worth $400 million? And the third is promoting respect for the human rights. The summit seeks to encourage specific action and commitment on behalf of leaders to meaningful domestic reforms and international initiatives. Isn't it interference in the internal affairs of India? And India has, in a very, very unacceptable manner, been rather led by the nose. India should have refused. Now, India's contribution to this agenda will be scrutinized, as I said, closely. Not because in the recent weeks Indians have heard a number of interesting interpretations and observations about the democracy and human rights from the country's leaders. And one theme that has emerged from these observations, which is going to be a subject of condemnation for India, is that cultural relativism, the Indianness of Indian democracy. As India becomes more democratic, democracy will become even more Indian in sensibility and texture. And this was the statement given by the Minister for External Affairs, Mr. Jaishankar, a very competent person. And what's wrong with that? Every country has its unique capabilities and unique culture. And no political institution can be divorced from the political culture and the social culture. They are interlinked. If we say that US's culture permeates the democracy, we accept it. But when we say Indian culture is the connecting link of the democratic actions, we condemn it. In Prime Minister Modi had said India is a mother of democracy, and he had referred to our old ways, the old system of democracy. And he was very right. When he said in Rajya Sabha that our democracy is not a Western institution, it's a human institution. And Indian history is filled with examples of democratic institutions. We had mention of 81 democracies in ancient India. This was the government. And what's wrong with that? As a matter of fact, Indian experiment with democracy has been there since Vedic times. There used to be two houses for every king. It was a constitutional monarchy. The two houses used to be Sabha and Samiti, the upper house and the lower house. Exactly like the bicameral legislatures of today. So we talk of the Britain being the father of democratic institution. No, it's India. Maybe not the father, but the grandfather. Now coming to the second theme, the role of civil society. It has been accused of defaming and bringing harm to India, which it is. It has espoused even National Security Advisor when he said that the new frontier of a fourth generation war is civil society. And on the Foundation Day of Human Rights Commission, the Prime Minister said that the nation must be wary of those who dent India's image in the world as by selectively raising human rights violations. You see, in a country of 1.3 billion people, if 100 odd people all over India are victims, what's the percentage? And look at the percentage of the victims in a country of, say, 300 million. So 1.3 billion plus and 300 billion, and the number of the percentage is much higher in those countries. And then we criticize India. But as I said, India has not looked into the reasons for being invited. India could not have refused it straight away. I can understand it because they don't want to annoy people. But that sometimes you've got to assert people. When Mrs. Gandhi could afford to annoy Nixon, India could easily tell Biden to mind his own business. But by agreeing to go there, Modi has opened the door for condemnation. It's a self-invited condemnation. It reminds me of the Muharram celebrations of the Muslims, where the celebrants who are mourning Muharram, they lash themselves and bleed. Is it a death wish? I don't know. But these statements of the foreign minister and the prime minister are going to be used to criticize them. The third theme is around the responsibility of ensuring democratic rights. This responsibility rests with the government. But then they are not going to see that. Look at the active role the Supreme Courts and the High Courts are playing, and even at the lower level I have seen that one of the supposed alleged terrorists, Sri, was given bail by the magistrate, class 1, and he said, this FIR is wrong. So if there is ever a violation of human rights, the judiciary is very strong, the press is very strong, but they will not talk about it. They'll talk about the cases. Now, imagine they'll talk about the cancellation of the two stand-up comics in Bengaluru, a Faruqi and a Veer Das. And then there's a puzzling trend of the governments when confronted with a violation by pointing that the right violations of the terrorists. But then, do you want to say that the terrorists should be given a free hand to do whatever they want and kill innocent people? That's not done. Hasn't USA ever done that? Hasn't Britain ever done that? Every country protects its people and its borders, whatever the reason may be. So PM's expected participation in the summit is going to come against this rather bleak backdrop of misinformation, of prejudice, of polarization on the issues, of relativism and confusion. And the Prime Minister would also have to reconcile the paradox inherent in submitting to international gaze at a global assembly where he will be compelled to make commitments adhering to the Western standards of democracy, while claiming that Indian democracy is its own model. And why should India follow that democratic model of USA, which is much more authoritarian as a matter of fact? The strongest leader, for example, even in Canada, the Prime Minister can even throw out the Governor General. So much powerful he is. He can rule for 4 years without even once calling a parliament. But nobody calls him a dictator, though he is. So why should India adhere to the Western standards? And that is something Modi would be put on the map. And I'm not bothered about Modi being put on the map. It will be India which will be put on the map. You remember in March this year, the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar dismissed the global standards and international metrics of democracy as rubbish. His exact words: you use the dichotomy of democracy and autocracy. You want the truthful answer, it's hypocrisy. And I was very happy that for once our ministers were not taking any bullshit from the critics, and that criticism comes from the enemies. You want the truthful answer, it's hypocrisy. And if Modi is not going, he should be very clear and tell them to mind their own business and say, you have no business condemning us, criticizing us. It's like the pot calling the kettle black. And Jaishankar went on to say, because you have set a self-appointed custodian of the world who find it very difficult to stomach that somebody in India is not looking for their approval. So they invent their rules, their parameters, they pass the judgment and make out some kind of a global exercise. This was an excellent response by Jaishankar. And that should have been maintained, and the government of India should have said, we are not going to come because the whole concept of Western system of democracy is not acceptable. We have our own way of democracy. Now, for perspective, this is what China says too. There was a virtual summit on November 16 between President Biden and President Xi. And Biden brought up the case of human rights records. And President Xi told him clearly that there cannot be uniform model of democracy. And he dismissed other forms of democratic which are different from the US view. He said, no, that's rubbish. So no one has yet explained what the normative models that countries including India, China, Iran, Russia, Central Asia are using when they demand for Afghanistan should become a gender and minority inclusive country. Why should India be forced to condemnation, and that's why I say this was a diplomatic failure on the part. And this is the habit of the Indian government. They rush in without thought. And then they say we are being condemned and criticized for no reason. I agree, they are being condemned for no reason, but then they are doing what they should not do. The old proverb, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Now, the summit is going to intensify these differences, particularly because the host has no shining credentials. Just 4 months back, Biden threw democracy in Afghanistan under Taliban wheels of dictatorship. If democracy building was never the role or the aim of US in Afghanistan, as Biden has said it was not our aim, why not unfreeze the Afghan assets and turn them over to them? And by inviting Taliban, Biden is giving respectability to Taliban. Since when Taliban became democratic and inclusive overnight? In this century alone, this was the second body blow from USA to the cause of democracy. The first was the normalized violation of human rights during the global war of terror in the name of security. In the name of security, they'll arrest anybody. Weren't they not human rights violations? It's no coincidence that the largest slide in democracy has come up in the last 2 decades. But the fountainhead of that decay is the leader, USA. In its own interest, it acts pragmatically and chooses strategic allies and partners, not putting too fine a point on either. Then they call them democrat, autocrat, dictator, or kleptocrat. USA has always weaponized human rights to achieve strategic objectives, as in the Cold War and you remember the boycott of Winter Olympics in China by USA, isn't that twisting the arm? Now the list of the invitees has geopolitics written all over it in bold letters. And in fact, that increases my cynicism about democracy as propagated and universalism of human rights. The world's most authoritarian countries and even some constitutional democracies, human rights can never be above the national security. Of course, human rights should be protected. I don't deny it. But then that's what the courts are meant for, and they are doing a great job in India in defending human rights. They are making mistakes a lot. I've been condemning them. So, some of these will be able to preen at the summit. And who will be preening? People like Imran Khan, Taliban leaders. They'll be saying, well, we are holier than thou. India is bad, without looking at what happened in Sialkot the other day. And they'll talk about it. When they preen and project their participation as an endorsement of their democratic claims, while condemning India, shouting at the top of their voice, India would come out, but it would come out with some mud smeared on it. Those at the barricades and worse in the jails who are there, the fight will remain a lonely and difficult one, and then there will be reaction to this. This would make the establishment angry because they will feel that they have been targeted unnecessarily. And that's why Indira Gandhi had told Nixon, hands off, we don't want to have any truck with you, and we don't need your guide. And that's exactly what Jaishankar said in March. As a matter of fact, that should have been the guiding policy. And we should have adhered to that. Modi should not have accepted that invitation because this is an invitation for being condemned and criticized, not by the honest brokers, but by definitely biased, prejudiced enemies of India. And we are offering them our weakness, if any, on a platter. Lord, how stupid at times we can be. It is an error. And even now there's a time for Modi to say, no, I'm too busy with my people, especially now since the CDS has died. It's a crisis for the defense till the new CDS takes place because there's a vacuum at the top. So this is an opportunity for India to say, no, we are not coming. You go ahead with your. Or at the most, what they should do is they should downgrade the representation from the Prime Minister to a bureaucrat. Let the bureaucrat go, and then the government would have a right of deniability, and that is what is required. Thank you.